Thanks very much indeed, Joyce. 7 minutes past 8 this Friday morning. You're listening to Good Morning Scotland with Laura McKeever and Martin Geisler. And so we wait and wait and wait. It's looking like we won't be getting sight of Sue Gray's report into Downing Street lockdown-busting parties until early next week. Although we don't yet know how it's going to impact Boris Johnson's premiership, we can assess how the whole Partygate episode is affecting people's faith in politics in Britain. To help us do that, we can speak to the former Scottish Labour leader Kezia Dugdale. She is now director of the John Smith Centre at Glasgow University, which aims to promote trust in politics and public service. Good morning to you.
Morning, Martin.
So, you're the director of an institute that aims to promote trust in politics. A hard job at the moment, isn't it? Made all the harder by this Partygate episode. Do we have any... I mean, we've all seen the Vox Pops. People seem to be absolutely furious. That's apparently the kind of public response to this. Is there any kind of scientific evidence as to what extent it has eroded trust?
There's a little bit, but we are relying on time to tell in terms of just how damaging it is in the long term. First of all, there's the polls that you can look at. So if you look at the personal approval ratings of the Prime Minister, they've fallen through the floor. If you look at the polls for different political parties, you can see that the Labour Party have overtaken the Conservatives in most of the polls for the last 2 months. Now, these are really circumstantial bits of evidence that don't really speak to a wider picture about how people might vote in a general election. The thing that we should be perhaps worried about is when you look at polls that study the issues that matter most to people across the country. Now, normally you would expect the economy to be right at the top of that list, but of course COVID-19 has been the big issue for a long and sustained period of time now. What's interesting about the latest poll that looks at issues is that faith in politics, in government and in politicians is now the second most important issue to people in the country, or should I say the lack of faith in politicians, government and politicians. That's a really worrying development, and one that suggests that there could be really long-term damage coming out of this affair. Yeah,
and so do you think long-term damage not just for Boris Johnson and the Conservatives, but it seeps across, it kind of toxifies our whole kind of perception of politics?
Yes, there's a very real danger that this could affect politicians in the round rather than one particular individual or one particular political party. And it's worth mentioning, Martin, actually, that trust in politicians has been historically low in Britain since we kept records. And in a way, you want it to be low, because if you think of the countries around the world where trust in leaders is really high, they tend to be dictatorships or countries that we don't aspire to be like. That said, we've got really worryingly low levels of trust in the country, and they're also really unequal, with people on low incomes, women and young people being particularly distrustful of their leaders.
So our trust in politicians hasn't actually changed all that much over the years. Are we just a bit more outspoken about it now?
Well, as I say, it's always been low. It took a fairly dramatic dip after the last financial crash around 2008, and it got a little bit worse still since Brexit. Now, it looks to me like it could dip again after this particular affair, and then you've got to ask yourself, how much lower can it go, and what are the consequences of that? And all the evidence around trust across Europe and indeed around the world shows that when you get to really low levels of trust, people, the public, us, the citizens, start to question why they should obey the rules if the people in charge aren't obeying the rules. And that's really dangerous when you think about the current public health issues that we're dealing with just now. That's why trust and faith in politicians and governments actually matters, and we need to put some real efforts into rebuilding that.
I mean, a lack of trust in politicians. Donald Trump, memorably and possibly most notably, capitalised on that, didn't he? The whole drain the swamp thing, get rid of these politicians, traditional politics doesn't work, bring in somebody new. Was that a manifestation? Am I right in citing that as a manifestation of how people's trust or lack of trust in politicians can really change things?
Yes, although I think that speaks really to the dangers of populism, and populism is a phenomenon we're seeing around the world where leaders basically feed on the fear of people in politics, and they rely on emotion rather than rational evidence when it comes to their policies. There's lots of things we can do, though, to rebuild trust in government. None of them are quick, none of them will happen overnight, trust in politicians in particular. And we're working at the John Smith Centre with the organisation More in Common to look at the extent to which trust in the political system in Britain is broken and what you can do to fix that. And number one on the list is that codes of conduct, rules are followed. The public expect there to be consequences when politicians and governments break their own rules. So that'll be a real litmus test going forward if we're going to have any attempts to really rebuild these levels of trust and faith in the system.
Yeah, I mean, For example, a root and branch civil service inquiry into Partygate and a police inquiry into Partygate. I mean, we can't anticipate the outcomes of this, but unless what we get from Sue Gray and from the police is perceived to be a whitewash by the public, surely this whole process is good for public trust. The system's working, right?
That will be the test. Yes, you're absolutely right. All these processes matter, and the public having faith in those processes matters, and the outcomes of those being applied matters too. That's just one of the 9 different recommendations that More in Common have come up with in terms of what you can do to rebuild trust. The other side of the equation, though, is about making sure this doesn't lead to people being disenfranchised from politics. So there's lots of evidence to say that this whole affair might not be that damaging because people have such a low opinion of politicians anyway that they expected them to break the rules. So it doesn't move the dial in any sense. I really worry about that. I really worry about the danger that this might turn people even further away from democratic participation. And by that, I mean, not just voting, but taking part in decisions in their own communities, in their own workplaces, and in their own environment. So I think there's an awful lot of work we need to do to encourage people towards democratic participation in all its forms to try and limit the damage of this longer term.
Yeah. OK. All right. Well, listen, we will have something solid to talk about and assess as and when Sue Gray's report does come out. Goodness knows when that will be, but for pity's sake, don't make it much longer. Kezia Dugdale, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning.
It's just approaching